Hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to show you guys how to make great looking braided hair. So hair is one of those things that it requires a little bit of a technique, and I'm going to go through a 4-part framework that you can use to have great looking braided hair. So for braided hair, the first thing that's really important is that you want to use nice sort of longer fluid quick lines. So as you notice, I'm going through and my lines are pretty long and they're pretty brisk. So I'm kind of like making lines that are quicker, right? So you don't want slow lines on this. You want faster, brisker lines that are going to kind of show a little bit of movement in the hair. So try that in your drawings. So the second thing that will really make your drawing stand out is having a lot of contrast. So contrast is basically just having strong amounts of darks, dark values next to lighter values. And so what value basically again is just sort of like, think of a value scale, a gradient from your darkest black to a light. And in the braid, you'll notice that there's, some really dark areas kind of towards those crevices. And then in other parts, it's much lighter. So what that does is it gives the drawing a little bit more of a three-dimensional quality, whereas if the value was all the same, it wouldn't look as three-dimensional. So not only will the high contrast give a sense of it looking more 3D and having more depth, which is what you're going for in your drawing and looking more realistic and all that, it also sort of gives a sense of as if light is hitting the hair. And so that's something else that you want to think about whenever you're drawing. Select a photograph that has a little bit more reflections on it, because that will also give you a little bit more to work with. Okay, so the first thing remember was having line quality that's kind of like fast, quick lines. The second thing was contrast. Having high contrast is going to make it look more realistic, more 3D. The third thing is that you want to think about whenever you're drawing hair, this idea of it having some volume or structure. But at the same time, you want it to have sort of movement and fluidity. So whenever you're drawing hair, you're going to be thinking about those two things, right? So think of like fluidity on one side of like a spectrum, and maybe structure on the other side. And you're trying to kind of balance both of those, because if it's too structural, it might look kind of like blocky. But if it's too fluid, it might not look, 3D enough. So you're trying to balance those two things out so that you can get the most realistic drawing. If you're not already a subscriber, please consider becoming a subscriber, and thank you for watching the video. If you like the video, please hit the actual like button and leave a comment. That really helps get it out to more people, and I really appreciate that. Okay, so now I'm doing the back of the head, and one thing that I'm trying to do is make the hair in the back of the head a little bit darker, and what that's going to do is that's actually going to make the braided part sort of stand out a little bit more and sort of like push forward visually. So think about that too. Like if you have one section that's overall darker than another section, that can kind of help it sort of like have a little bit more three-dimensional quality. So that's just another example of that. And then in this section too, you can again see some of the other things that I've been talking about, like having a lot of contrast and also having quick speed of line. So again, here you see that whole area is darker overall than the braided portion. Okay, so the fourth thing that you want to do when you're drawing hair is that you want to sort of balance out some of the details like wispy hairs with having sort of like, again, the more structural. So as you can see on the side, those are kind of like the wispy type of hairs that I'm drawing. And by having individual hairs that you can actually see, it'll make it more realistic. But if you have all individual hairs, it won't look realistic. So a lot of times when you're drawing, you're sort of balancing things out. Like if you look at someone's hair, visually, we don't process every single hair visually. When we look at somebody, we get kind of an overall impression of how somebody looks. So what makes it look more realistic though is having a couple of those little wispy hairs sort of pop out. So make sure that when you're drawing, you're kind of going back in and maybe adding some of those little wispy hairs and refining and adding some details. Thanks again for joining. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment. And thanks again for joining.